All right, welcome to another episode of The Rundown. We had a big Monday night football game between the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Bears, and for both of these teams' quarterbacks, they kind of went in the opposite direction. Caleb Williams started out 10 for 10, 86 yards, and I know you can attribute a lot of that to the first series script, but still, he was getting the ball out of his hands quick, and I know that was reiterated to him and inundated in him because with the coaching staff because he took 68 sacks last season, which a lot of that you can attribute that to him, even though the offensive line was god awful last year. And I know that he took a lot of checkdowns, but I don't really care. I'm just happy to see that he's able to get the ball out of his hands because a lot of playing quarterback is just playing in structure and just getting the ball out of your hands. And he was able to do that at least in the first half. After that, he was 11 for 25, and there were talks on the broadcast just about how he missed some open receivers. He missed DJ Moore on that 4th and 3 down the middle, and he also missed DJ Moore down the sideline that would have gotten him a touchdown. I mean, that didn't really affect them in the end, anyways, because they were able to score off that drive, but nonetheless, he still missed him. One benefit that Caleb Williams did show is his legs. When the pressure got to him, he was able to make some big runs, and the Vikings defenders, they just really couldn't get to him all that much, and he showed that he's able to scramble out of pressure when he gets it. But I have to talk about the offensive line because it just did not look all that great. By the end of the second quarter, they already had 4 false starts, and that's not going to cut it. That just puts your team in a bad position. And they invested a lot into this offensive line. They traded for Jonah Jackson and Joe Tooney. They signed Drew Dahlman. And you would think with those pieces that the offensive line would be better. And I hope it's just game one and they're still trying to find their chemistry and cohesion. But if they're not able to find it, it's going to be a long season for Caleb Williams. And it's going to be very hard for him to develop when your offensive line isn't all that great. JJ McCarthy, on the other hand, he started out pretty rough, 2 3 and outs, but that third position, you could see that he was able to calm down a little bit. Jordan Mason got some 6 7 yards runs that was able to calm him down, and Aaron Jones got a 42-yard PI, and because of that, they were able to get a field goal out of it, and you could just see that he was able to play more composed. And what really impressed me about him was after he threw that pick six, which was entirely on him, he responded pretty well. He was going to the offensive line, he was firing them up, and it just showed that he had poise and they were able to get a touchdown a couple possessions later. And that's what it is as a quarterback. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to throw interceptions, you're going to have drives where they don't really go all that well, and it's just how you respond to it. I mean, if you look at Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, he always threw 1 2 interceptions on the biggest stage of the game, and he was always able to respond off of that and just get his team going. And JJ McCarthy showed that he had poise and composure. And I know it's only one game, but I mean, even dating back to Michigan, he's shown that, he can stay composed when things get tough. And he kind of had a little bit of a rocky career in Michigan, but he was able to come out of it and they won a national championship. JJ definitely did have more help than Caleb when it came to the running game and also just getting bailed out by some PIs and penalties. But at the end of the day, he did come up clutch, and that's just something that you can build off of for sure. And I hope that we can see that more and more throughout the season. I'm sure that McCarthy, like Caleb, is probably going to have ups and downs, but they just have to show that they have a lot of potential. And I think that the future, at least off of this one game, is definitely looking bright for JJ McCarthy. Now, going back to Caleb, I know there's going to be a lot of discourse on him, and lots of people in the media and even some fans are saying that Caleb might not be that guy. And I know this was a brutal loss because they were up 17-6, and they should have been able to capitalize on that and build a bigger lead, but they just weren't able to do it. And he just made some mistakes that weren't ideal, but I thought he showed some good things, like I said, with like getting the ball out and being able to escape pressure, but he definitely does need to be better. I'm not saying that he doesn't, but it's only game one. He's under a new system with Ben Johnson. I mean, I'm not saying you kind of have to treat him like a rookie, but he is kind of a rookie in terms of that he has to throw out what the last coaching staff told him, and he has to implement what this new coaching staff is telling him, because the last coaching staff, I mean, let's be honest, they kind of sucked. I mean, Shane Waldron was just not a good offensive coordinator, and Matt Eberflus, he just did not seem to have the pulse on that team, and he made some questionable game management decisions. So it's going to be a learning process for Caleb Williams, and I think as the season goes along, he should be able to be better. Now, what I will say is, I think by Thanksgiving he has to show something, and that's something that Colin Cowherd always says. Second year Thanksgiving, you have to show something. We know whether or not you're going to be good, and I actually agree with him, especially with this roster, because the offensive line is definitely improved. He has some weapons in Roma Dunze, DJ Moore, Colston Loveland, and Cole Kmet. And if he's still struggling late in the season with those type of weapons at his disposal, then yeah, I think it's definitely time to be concerned, and you have to ask yourself the question whether or not you want to move on from him, especially if it doesn't seem that he's being receptive to Ben Johnson's coaching, because there was a big piece done on him by Tyler Dunn. I was only able to read excerpts of it, but basically what I read, it wasn't all that great. It talked about how he wasn't receptive to coaching. They had to change the cadence for him. He didn't have respect of some of his teammates in the locker room, and how some of his teammates wanted Tyson Bagent to start, which is freaking insane. But I think Caleb knows that with this new coaching staff, he has to be on his best behavior, and that if he's not able to work with Ben Johnson, who is widely respected throughout the league, it's going to be rocky for him. And I'm sure that somebody will take a flyer on him if Chicago ever decides to move on, and if Ben Johnson decides that he's just not my type of quarterback. But you never know how that team is going to look, and if that team is going to have the weapons like they do in Chicago. Now, I know Chicago has pretty much been a poverty franchise, but they did get some weapons for him, and he does have a decent roster around him. And if he can make it work, then you do have to ask yourself the question, is he a bust, and is he not the generational talent that so many people deemed him to be? So we'll see by Thanksgiving. I'm sure that he's going to have ups and downs like JJ McCarthy had, but he has to show something. Otherwise, you may have to move on from him and decline his fifth-year option. Now, another QB coach who are on rocky ground and who are on the hot seat are Mike McDaniel and Tua Tagovailoa of the Miami Dolphins. They got both raced against Indianapolis. They lost 33-8, and they had Daniel Jones looking like he was the reincarnation of Peyton Manning. 22 of 29, 272 yards. A guy who, for the most part, did not look great who looked great in New York, and all of a sudden against Miami, he was able to look like a Pro Bowl level player. And I definitely am overreacting to this loss, and I think that it's over for Mike McDaniel for the very least, because I just don't think he has the respect of this team. There were talks like in the summer and training camp, just how in the joint practices against other teams, they did not look good whatsoever, and that they were getting their asses kicked. And that definitely showed against the Colts, because they just weren't competitive whatsoever, and they did not score until the end of the fourth quarter. And I know, like, for some possessions they had to go for it on fourth when they could have gotten a field goal because they were down behind so much, but I mean, still, okay, so they would have lost like 33-15 or whatever. I mean, that doesn't make things really any better for me, at least. So, and then there was all this talk about how players are coming in late, and I just don't think he has the command over a locker room. I'm sure that as an offensive coordinator, he definitely has a great deal of talent, but just as a head coach, it's very hard to be soft on guys at first, and then you're going to throw the hammer down. I think it's much easier to be tough on guys first and then loosen up, kind of like what John Harbaugh did, where John Harbaugh was this big, tough guy, but as time went on, he definitely loosened up a bit, and you can do it that way, but doing it the opposite way, guys are just going to look at you sideways. And you can just tell that guys look at him sideways, because it's clear that he just does not have the respect of this team. And Tua, I've always been very skeptical of him, and I'm just not sure how far you can go with him as a franchise quarterback. Now, I know they paid him like a whole bunch of money, and it's going to be very hard to get rid of him, whether it's cutting him, and I don't think anybody is going to want to trade for him with that massive contract. And honestly, they didn't really have a choice but to pay him because he looked good that third year, and they didn't really have any options. When you have a quarterback who's performing well and they have a good season, you really don't have any other choice but to pay him. I mean, the same thing happened with Daniel Jones with Brian Daboll that first year, where Daniel Jones just balled out. Um, they win a playoff game against Minnesota. It looks like he has some potential, and then the Giants pay him all that money, but then they have to get rid of him. And I don't think Tua's as bad as Daniel Jones is, but he's not particularly tall. Um, doesn't have the greatest arm strength, and it just feels that everything needs to be perfect around him. He needs to have the perfect O line. He needs to have the perfect wide receivers like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, who are able to get yards after the catch. And not only that, he has to have like the perfect weather, because for some reason the Dolphins can't win under 40-degree weather. And I understand that not all of that falls on him, and some of that is due to coaching, but I do think some of that absolutely does fall on Tua, and that he does have limitations in cold weather. And I'm sure with a better coach, they might be able to perform better in colder weather. But I just think overall, Tua is not going to be a guy who's going to be great in cold weather. And in the AFC, you're going to have to be able to perform in cold weather if you want to go far in the playoffs. You're going to have to go to Buffalo, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Kansas City, New England, you name it. And in sunny Miami, it's easy to win those games and have that great weather. But when you have to go on the road, that's when things get tough. I think McDaniel probably gets fired mid-season if I have to bet, and I don't know who they're gonna have to be his replacement or his interim head coach. But yeah, it's just not looking good. And I just wonder with McDaniels and Tua if the magic has just run out. I mean, he was able to scheme things up for a couple of years, but I think that maybe the league has caught up to him and he just hasn't been able to adapt. And that happens to offensive coaches. It happened to Kyle Shanahan for sure. It happened to Sean McVay, and even Sean McVay admitted that he had to change some things up. So Mike McDaniels definitely has to do the same. But unfortunately for him, I think he's just limited by having Tua as his quarterback. And I know Tua is smart and he's very deadly accurate, and he's a good guy, but as a franchise quarterback, you just have to have the physical capabilities of playing the quarterback position. And unfortunately, he just gets banged up with concussions. And because of that, I just don't think he can play in the NFL long term. And even last year, people were talking about whether or not Tua should retire from football. He's already made so much money, but he's already gotten a lot of concussions for someone who's been in the league, well, at that point, for 4 years. So yeah, I don't think the that Tua is very long for the NFL, and I think at some point or the other he's gonna have to throw up his hands and say, "I need to retire. I made a lot of money. I did what I needed to do, but it's time for me to leave the game." And another thing about Tua after this game in the post-game press conference, I did not like his quote talking about, "I want to see who's going to be here Tuesday. I want to see if these guys are going to work hard." A, the guy didn't play well. B, I don't think he's earned the stripes or he has enough pelts on the wall to say those kind of things to the media. He only had one great year from start to finish, and in that year they got absolutely destroyed by Kansas City because, like I've said, they can't win in the cold weather, and it did not seem that they wanted to be there whatsoever. And in other seasons, he just gets banged up with concussions and he can't play. If Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, or heck, even Jalen Hurts, if they wanted to say that, I'm okay with it because they have accomplished some things in this league, some more than others, but they have earned their stripes and they do have pelts on the walls. But Tua just doesn't have that yet. And And I don't think it was a good idea for him to make those comments. And another thing with Miami is the Tyreek Hill situation. That's also another weird thing. It's clear that Tyreek Hill definitely does not want to be there. I mean, last year he refused to go in a game and he talked about how he wanted to be traded. And then Tua talked about how he has to re earn the trust in the locker room and how he wasn't voted captain. So I think sooner rather than later, he's probably going to want out. And when you have a disgruntled wide receiver, you have no choice but to get rid of him. So I think probably at the end of the season, they're going to get rid of him and they're going to have to start anew somehow with a new coaching staff and get some new players in there. I just think with this new coaching staff, I know Brian Flores was on the other end of the spectrum in terms of like being a really, really tough guy and how players did not like him whatsoever and how he kind of destroyed Tua's confidence. And I'll give Mike McDaniel's credit for rebuilding Tua's confidence and being able to have a scheme that's geared towards him. But I just think with this next coach, I mean, obviously X and O's matters, but the next coach has to be able to be a commanding presence and have the respect of the guys in the locker room and have them understand that coming up late isn't going to be acceptable. They're going to have to compete and join practices. And with someone like Tyreek Hill refusing to go back in the game, that's not going to be acceptable. I think a lot of coaches, even though Tyreek Hill is supremely talented, would have just said, no, I'm good. I think Andy Reid probably would have traded him. I think Kyle Shanahan probably would have done the same thing. I think Sean McVay would have done it. Belichick, when he was in the NFL, he absolutely would have done it. So, yeah, I just think Miami's going to have to retool or rebuild a bit. And if, actually not if, when Mike McDaniel gets fired, Chris Grier has to go also. I don't understand how someone can be a general manager in the NFL for 10 years and they don't have one playoff game. I give John Schneider hell, but he's at least won one playoff game in the last 10 years. I mean, I think 10 years is enough for you to at least win one playoff game. I'm all for giving general managers and coaches time to figure things out, especially when they're part of an organization that doesn't have a lot of success and they need to rebuild. But I think 10 years is more than enough for a rebuild. And honestly, I think at max for a rebuild, you should get maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 years. But the fact that he hasn't been able to construct a roster that gets them at least a playoff win, that's unacceptable. And what's crazier is that he hasn't been able to find a true franchise quarterback. And I know some people would disagree with me about that because they think Tua is that guy. I don't. And it's also crazy that he also passed up Justin Herbert for Tua. And apparently, reportedly, Brian Flores wanted him. So, yeah, not looking good for Miami. And they're going to have a tough road ahead of them. And another team who may have a tough road ahead of them is the New York Giants. And that's another quarterback and coach who are kind of on the hot seat. They lost against the Washington Commanders 21-6. Russell Wilson was 17 for 37, 168 yards. Jaden Daniels, on the other hand, was 19 for 30, 233 yards. Russ had a 25.5 quarterback rating and had 4.5 yards per attempt. And I just think it's over for him. He just can't play make like he used to. I know, at least in this game, he had 8 carries for 44 yards, but he used to be able to kill you with his legs and arms, and he just can't do that anymore. He just can't move the way he used to. He can't be a pocket quarterback because he can't see in the middle of the field, and if you don't have the athleticism where you can scramble out of the pocket and just make plays, that's going to come back to bite you. And everyone is wondering, whether it's media members or fans, on when the hell are they going to start Jackson Dart. Some want it done right now, and some have just seen enough of Russell Wilson and want Jackson Dart to just get in there. Brian Flores obviously wants to save his job, and there's a reason that he started Russ, because he thinks Russ is a veteran quarterback and that he can tread water for a little bit. But I'm just not sure, because their next 2 games are going to be pretty tough. They have the Cowboys coming up next. They have the Chiefs coming up next. And I think that there's a very good chance that they go 0 for 3 based on how Russ looked in week 1. And if you're already 0 for 3, or at best, they're going to be 1 for 2, I don't see any chance in hell that they beat the Cowboys and the Chiefs. What's the point? I mean, you're already losing with Russell Wilson. You may as well get Jackson Dart in there and see what he can do. I know sometimes it's not ideal to start a quarterback uh, very early in the season or in the beginning of the season, and you want him to like watch for a year, and that's shown that that has been successful. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and you just have to see some potential with him. So why not just start him early? Obviously, he's going to have his ups and downs, and hopefully, management understands that. But hopefully, he can show that he has something and he's able to get the respect of the guys in the locker room, and he has like some poise and command to play the quarterback position. So I think probably week 4, week 5, they're probably going to throw him out there. Uh, I said week 7, week 8 before the season, but I think they're probably going to have to ditch that plan. Uh, I think as long as he kind of has a Drake May like season where Drake May also had some ups and downs, but he showed a lot of potential. And the new coaching staff wanted to see what they got with him, and lots of fans were also excited about Drake May. I think if Jackson Dart can do something of that sort, he definitely can have a bright future ahead of him. And Brian Daboll, he's going to be all invested to make sure that Jackson Dart can succeed, because his job hinges on him making sure that he gets this Jackson Dart pick after he was done with Daniel Jones, which makes sense because I don't think Daniel Jones is that good. And then wanting Russell Wilson, obviously that's not going to work out, but they didn't pay Russell a lot of money, so that's okay. So he just has to make sure that he gets this Jackson Dart pick right. And if you don't hit on a quarterback, that's pretty much the death nail in your coaching career, at least for this stop. Who knows? Maybe if he gets fired, he can get another job sometime down the road. But at least with the New York Giants, he has to get this one right, because if he doesn't, it's going to be over for him and Joe Shane. So we shall see what happens. Now I want to go over to a little bit more west for the San Francisco 49ers, and are they in trouble? George Kittle has been placed on IR, so he's going to miss the next 4 weeks. And Kyle Shanahan also talks about how Brock Purdy is having a toe issue, and quarterbacks having toe issues, that's definitely a big thing. And Brock Purdy is definitely someone who relies a little bit on his mobility. And if Brock Purdy isn't able to play, then they may have to start Mac Jones. And I know that there's a lot of talk about Mac Jones, and I think Mac Jones is a backup at best, but he's been a starter before. He's been in the league for 6 years now. Played under Bill Belichick. I'm sure that he can be fine to run an offense for 2 to 3 weeks. And I think even if it does come to that, they should be okay. Their next 4 games are against the Saints, the Cardinals, the Jaguars, and the Rams. Losing George Kittle is tough. Fortunately, they still have Jawan Jennings. Turned out his shoulder MRI, his shoulder injury wasn't that bad, and the MRI showed that it wasn't too bad and that he's day-to-day. Who knows if he's going to play against New Orleans or not, but I think they should be able to beat New Orleans, even if Mac and if Brock and George Kittle don't play for some reason. Well, George Kittle's not going to play, but if Brock isn't able to play for some reason. But Brock has to be there for the Cardinals, the Jaguars, and the Rams. If Brock isn't there for either of those games, the 49ers are absolutely toast, and they have no chance of winning those games whatsoever. They may go 1-2 in that span at best. So, as long as Brock Purdy's healthy for 3 of the 4 games, I think that they should be okay. And I think if they go 2-2 during that span, that 4-game stretch, I think that he should be all right, and I think the 49ers will be all right. After that, they have the Bucs, the Falcons, the Texans, and Giants, and they need George Kittle for that. I mean, those teams aren't world beaters by any team, but you're not going to just walk over them and sleep over them. Those aren't give me wins. They're definitely good teams. The Bucs and Falcons have a good shot of winning the division and making the playoffs. Same with the Texans and the Giants, even though I don't think that they're the greatest team. And at that point, they may start Jackson Dart. They still have a pretty good defensive line. So hopefully after that, they're healthy and ready to go. But with the 49ers and their history, whenever they have injuries, it just gets really bad, man. I mean, I hope Bosa doesn't get hurt. I hope Juwan Jennings doesn't get hurt. I hope anyone on the offensive line doesn't get injured because for the 49ers, when they're injured, they can get really injured and it can be a spiraling effect. Same with the Ravens. When they get injured, they really get injured. I don't know what the hell is going on in both of those organizations when it comes to injuries, but it can be bad. And God forbid they lose Christian McCaffrey. And Christian McCaffrey is already injury prone and he's already been dealing with calf issues. So if he goes, it's over. But if it's only Kittle and if Brock is able to be healthy the rest of the way, they should be all right because they do have a Mickey Mouse schedule. Now I want to talk a little bit about Washington and Green Bay, and I'm stoked for this game. Both of these teams have a lot of potential. They won their openers, and both of the quarterbacks are also pretty good. It's going to be interesting to see Washington go against this defensive line. Uh, it's definitely another level than what they had going up against the Giants. Micah Parsons, it looks like he's going to be limited, but even though Micah Parsons may be limited, I still think that it's going to be tough for Jaden Daniels to go against that defense. And even in the limited time that Micah played against Detroit, he still looked pretty good. Also interested to see how Jaden Daniels also interested to see how Jordan Love looks. I mean, even though he only threw for 188 yards against Detroit, he still had multiple down the field plays, and their offense absolutely looked explosive. So it'll be interesting to see if Jordan Love can keep that up with his wide receiving core. I predicted before the season that this would be my NFC Championship matchup. Um, and I think that this regular season game is absolutely important because I think it'll be indicative to see how both of these teams match up against each other. I know that the playoffs can be another different animal and it's a different point of the season and you've already played 16, 17 games and this is only week 2, but I still think that regular season games are important, especially when those teams face each other in the playoffs later. I mean, the Patriots faced the Giants in the regular season and their undefeated season, and Bill Belichick said that he knew that the Giants would be a tough out, and they did prove to be a tough out because the Patriots lost against them and the Giants spoiled their undefeated season. So this game is going to be a good litmus test for both teams. Based on how Green Bay looked against how Green Bay looked against Detroit, I'm going to say Green Bay wins 24-21 against Washington. I think it'll be a nip and tuck game, but Green Bay is going to pull away at the end, and that Jordan Love is going to have a field day with his wide receivers, and I think Jaden Daniels, he'll have a pretty good day, even going against that tough Packers defensive line. And yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. I will be back Friday with more NFL news and even previewing a few of the other games on Sunday, and I'll also be there to break down that Washington and Green Bay game on Thursday night. Thank you.